Wait a moment. Before you keep watching, before you move on to the next video, pause for a few seconds and ask yourself a very honest question. When you think about your future, what is the thing that scares you the most? Is it the possibility of losing money? Is it losing your job? Is it watching other people move forward in life while you feel like you're slowly falling behind? For many people, those answers sound reasonable. But if we go deeper, there is another fear hiding underneath all of them. A fear that most people never say out loud. The fear of failure. Not just failing in a project, not just failing in a business, but failing in a way that makes other people see it. We fear doing something wrong. We fear people judging us. We fear the quiet looks of doubt from friends, colleagues, and family members. We fear the moment when we try something and it doesn't work. And suddenly it feels like everyone is watching. For many people, that feeling is unbearable. So instead of risking failure, they choose safety. But the strange thing is this fear did not appear randomly. Most of us were trained to think this way from the time we were children. In school, mistakes were punished. Wrong answers meant losing points. Bad grades meant embarrassment. Being the student who failed a test often meant feeling ashamed. Slowly, without realizing it, we learned an invisible rule about life. Mistakes are dangerous. Failure should be avoided, and success means getting everything right the first time. But real life does not work like a classroom. Real life is not a single test. It is a long experiment, and the people who succeed in that experiment are rarely the people who avoid mistakes. They are the people who learn from them the fastest. Yet most people never discovered this truth. Because fear quietly shapes their decisions. It pushes them toward stability, toward predictable outcomes, toward paths that feel safe. They choose that feel secure. They follow career paths that everyone else follows. They live lives that look stable from the outside. But deep inside, many of them carry a quiet question. What if I had tried? Imagine two people living in Chicago. One works a steady corporate job on Michigan Avenue. Every day looks almost identical. The schedule is predictable. The paycheck arrives every 2 weeks. From the outside, everything looks stable. The other person lives in a small apartment near West Loop. They are trying to build something, a small online business, a startup idea, a side project that may or may not succeed. Their life is far less predictable. Some months are stressful. Some decisions feel uncertain. Sometimes the project fails completely and they have to start again. To most observers, the first life looks safer, but something interesting happens over time. 5 years pass, then 10. The first person becomes extremely experienced at maintaining stability, but the second person becomes extremely skilled at learning. They have tried many ideas, failed many times, adjusted their approach repeatedly, and each failure has given them information about markets, information about people, information about what actually works. The difference between these two people does not appear immediately. In the first year, their lives may even look similar, but over a decade, the gap can become enormous. Not because one person was smarter, not because one person had more resources, but because one person collected far more real-world experience. Failure became their teacher, while the other person spent years trying to avoid it. This is one of the biggest invisible differences between ordinary thinking and the mindset of highly successful people. Ordinary thinking says, avoid failure. Successful thinking says, use failure. If you look closely at the journeys of successful entrepreneurs in cities like New York, Austin, or San Francisco, you will notice something surprising. Their stories rarely begin with success. They begin with struggle. A founder launches a product that nobody buys. An investor loses money on their first deal. A business owner opens a store that fails within a year. If failure were truly the opposite of success, their stories would have ended there. But they didn't, because those early failures were not the end of the journey. They were part of the data. Each mistake revealed something: a wrong pricing model, the wrong audience, a product nobody truly needed. But once those lessons were learned, the next attempt became stronger, and the attempt after that became stronger still. Most people never reach that stage because they stop after the first fall. They interpret failure as proof that they are not good enough. But successful people interpret failure differently. They see it as feedback. When an ordinary person fails, the first question that appears in their mind is, why did this happen to me? But when a successful entrepreneur fails, their question is different. What did this teach me? That small difference completely changes the direction of their life, because one question leads to frustration, the other question leads to improvement. Over time, those small mental shifts compound, and they create enormous differences in outcome. If you are listening to this right now, there is a chance that you have already experienced this moment. The moment when you had an idea, a project you wanted to start, a skill you wanted to learn, a business you thought about building, but something stopped you. Maybe you told yourself, I need to learn more first. I need more savings. I need a better plan. I'll start when the timing feels right. But perfect timing almost never appears, and the people waiting for it often remain in the same place for years. Successful people do not have more certainty than you. They simply have more attempts. They are not less afraid. They just move forward while the fear is still there. And that realization changes everything. Because the moment you stop asking, how can I avoid failure? And start asking, what can I learn from the next attempt? Your relationship with risk begins to change. Fear loses its power. Curiosity replaces hesitation. And progress becomes possible. If this way of thinking resonates with you, make sure you subscribe to Mentivora Pulse, because in the next chapters, we are going to explore the deeper mindset that separates people who remain stuck from those who quietly build extraordinary lives. And the first thing we must understand is this: success is rarely about avoiding mistakes. It is about learning from them faster than everyone else. Most people believe that the safe path is the correct path: a stable job, a predictable salary, a quiet life with minimal uncertainty. On the surface, this sounds reasonable. In fact, it sounds responsible. But if you look deeper, you will notice something uncomfortable. The safest places in life often contain the fewest opportunities. Safety creates comfort, but comfort rarely creates transformation. And this is where the mindset of highly successful people begins to move in a completely different direction. From an early age, most people grow up asking the same question: what if I fail? It sounds like a logical question, but hidden inside that question is a powerful assumption. Failure must be avoided at all costs. That single belief quietly shapes thousands of decisions. It causes people to hesitate, to overthink, to delay action. They analyze every detail. They try to eliminate every possible risk. They wait until the plan feels perfect. But the strange result is this: the more they try to avoid mistakes, the less they actually move forward. They call it being careful. But sometimes, carefulness is simply a more polite name for hesitation. Now compare that mindset with the way many successful entrepreneurs think. Instead of asking, what if I fail? They ask a very different question: what if this works? At first, that change seems small, just a different sentence. But the consequences of that question are enormous, because the question you ask yourself determines what you see. If you ask, what if I fail? Your brain begins scanning for danger. You see risk, loss, embarrassment. You imagine everything that could go wrong. But if you ask, what if this works? Your brain begins scanning for opportunity. You imagine growth, possibilities, new doors opening. And human beings tend to move toward what they see most clearly. Imagine two people standing in Austin, Texas. Both are considering starting a small online business. The opportunity in front of them is exactly the same, but their mental focus is completely different. The first person sees the potential risks averse. What if I lose money? What if nobody buys the product? What if people criticize my idea? What if my friends think it's ridiculous? The second person sees a different set of possibilities. What if I learn something valuable? What if this connects me to new people? What if it leads to a better opportunity later? What if it becomes something bigger than I expect? Same opportunity, same environment, But two completely different futures begin forming in their minds. And over time, those two futures lead to two very different lives. Highly successful people understand a simple rule that many others overlook. Large rewards almost always exist on the other side of uncertainty. If a path were completely safe and guaranteed, millions of people would already be walking it. And when millions of people arrive somewhere first, the largest opportunities are usually gone. Real opportunity tends to exist in places where most people hesitate. Not because the opportunity isn't real, but because the uncertainty scares people away. Think about places like Silicon Valley. 30 years ago, many of the world's biggest technology companies did not exist. Starting a technology company felt uncertain, unpredictable, risky. Many people chose stable corporate jobs instead, but a smaller group of individuals accepted that uncertainty. They experimented, they failed, they adjusted, and eventually they built companies that reshaped entire industries. From the outside, their success can look like genius or luck. But if you look closely, you often find something simpler. They were willing to step forward when the outcome was not guaranteed. This does not mean successful people are reckless. That is a common misunderstanding. They are not gamblers who blindly risk everything. In fact, many successful entrepreneurs are extremely careful, but their caution operates differently. Instead of avoiding risk completely, they manage risk intelligently. They test ideas in small ways. They run experiments. They launch simple versions of projects before investing heavily. They gather information early. They fail early. They adjust early. In other words, they transform large, unknown risks into small, controlled experiments. Meanwhile, many people do the opposite. Because they fear failure, they wait. They wait for more knowledge. They wait for better timing. They wait for greater confidence. They wait until everything looks perfect. But during that waiting period, something important happens. Other people begin moving. Other people test ideas. Other people collect feedback. Other people improve. By the time the cautious observer finally feels ready, the early movers are already far ahead, not because they were smarter, but because they started learning sooner. This is why the real advantage in business and in life is rarely intelligence alone. The real advantage is learning speed, and learning speed depends on action. You cannot learn to ride a bicycle by reading about bicycles. You learn by falling. A few falls may hurt, but each fall teaches your body how to balance. If you tried to avoid falling completely, you would never learn to ride. The same principle applies to careers, to entrepreneurship, to financial growth, to personal development. You cannot learn how the water feels by standing on the shore forever. At some point, you have to step into the water. Highly successful people accept that uncomfortable moment. They accept the feeling of not knowing exactly what will happen next. They understand that uncertainty is not a signal to stop. Often, it is a signal that growth is nearby. They do not wait until fear disappears. They move forward while fear still exists. And something interesting happens after the first few steps. Fear begins to shrink, not because the situation changed, but because action creates clarity. The things that once seemed overwhelming start becoming manageable. The unknown becomes familiar. The impossible becomes achievable. And slowly, their comfort zone expands. Over time, this process creates an enormous difference between two types of people. One group waits for certainty. The other group creates certainty through action. One group spends years preparing. The other group spends years learning through real experience. One group hopes to avoid mistakes. The other group uses mistakes to accelerate their progress. And after many years, the gap between them can look almost unbelievable. From the outside, it may appear that some people are simply lucky. But inside their story is usually something much more practical. They tried more times. They learned faster. They adjusted sooner. And they continued moving while others were still waiting. If you think back to opportunities you once considered, there is a good chance some of them disappeared. Not because they were bad ideas, but because you were waiting for a moment of perfect certainty. That moment rarely arrives, and the people waiting for it often remain exactly where they started. Successful people do not have perfect clarity. They simply begin earlier. They begin with incomplete information. They accept that the full picture will only appear after action begins. And that willingness to begin creates momentum. If you are listening to this right now, you might recognize yourself in some part of this story. Maybe you postponed an idea. Maybe you delayed a project. Maybe you told yourself that you were not ready yet. That is completely normal. Every human being experiences that hesitation, but there is an important realization that can change everything. Confidence rarely appears before action. Confidence is built through action. Each step forward creates a little more clarity. Each attempt creates a little more experience. And each lesson brings you closer to the next opportunity. If you are still listening here, leave a comment below. I choose to start before everything is perfect. Sometimes a simple statement like that can remind you of an important truth. Progress rarely belongs to the person who waits the longest. It belongs to the person who begins learning the soonest. And if you want to continue exploring the mindset shifts that allow ordinary people to build extraordinary lives, make sure you subscribe to Mentivora Pulse, because in the next chapter, we will explore something even more powerful. Why successful people often try to fail earlier instead of trying to avoid failure entirely. And that idea may completely change the way you approach risk, opportunity, and growth. There is a strange idea that many successful people understand early in life, but very few people talk about openly. They are not trying to avoid failure. They are trying to fail sooner. At first, this sounds completely wrong. Everything we learned growing up told us the opposite. We were taught to win, to get things right the first time, to avoid mistakes whenever possible. But in the real world of business, opportunity, and wealth, the long-term winners are not the people who always win. The long-term winners are the people who know how to manage their losses. Imagine two people in New York City who decide to try investing. The first person wants to succeed quickly. They put a large amount of money into their first investment. They hope for a big return. They want their decision to be perfect. The second person takes a different approach. They invest a small amount. Their goal is not immediate success. Their goal is learning. Now imagine the investment fails. For the first person, the loss is painful. It damages their confidence. It may take years for them to recover financially. Some people never try again. But for the second person, the loss is small. They lose a little money, but they gain something extremely valuable. Experience. And with that experience, their next decision becomes smarter. This is one of the most important differences between ordinary thinking and the mindset of highly successful people. Ordinary thinking tries to avoid losing. Successful thinking tries to avoid losing big. Highly successful entrepreneurs often design their decisions around this idea. Instead of placing everything on one huge attempt, they create many small attempts, small projects, small investments, small experiments. Each experiment provides feedback. Each piece of feedback improves the next decision. Over time, this process becomes incredibly powerful because every attempt increases the probability of success. This is not luck, it is mathematics. Imagine a startup founder working in San Francisco. Their first product might fail, but that failure reveals something important. Maybe the price was wrong. Maybe the product solved the wrong problem. Maybe the audience was incorrect. Those lessons guide the next version. The second version becomes better. The third version becomes even stronger. From the outside, people often see only the final success, but hidden behind that success are dozens of quiet experiments, each one refining the idea, each one eliminating mistakes. Most people approach life differently. Because they fear failure, they delay action. They prepare for months, sometimes for years. They study every detail. They imagine every possible outcome. And eventually they decide to try. But by that time, they have built enormous expectations around that single attempt. They need it to work. They need it to succeed because they have invested so much time and emotional energy. And when that single attempt fails, the disappointment becomes overwhelming. This is why many people stop after their first major setback. But successful people reverse this process. Instead of building pressure into one giant moment, they spread the pressure across many smaller moments. Each attempt becomes manageable. Each mistake becomes affordable. And learning becomes continuous. Think about something simple. Learning to drive a car. Your first attempt will never be perfect. You might stall the engine. You might brake too suddenly. You might misjudge the distance between cars. But imagine if someone told you that you were allowed only one attempt to learn driving. You would be terrified. The pressure would be enormous, and you might never try. But because learning allows multiple attempts, you improve gradually. Mistakes become part of the process. Confidence grows through repetition. The same principle applies to building wealth, to entrepreneurship, to personal growth. Successful people understand that progress is often a game of probability. If you try something once, you gain one piece of data. If you try 10 times, you gain 10 pieces of data. If you try 100 times, you gain 100 pieces of data. Each attempt increases your understanding. Each attempt improves your decisions. And eventually, the correct path becomes clearer. Not because you guessed correctly, but because you eliminated so many wrong directions. There is an interesting truth in the world of business. When successful founders talk about how they discovered the right strategy, they rarely say they instantly knew the answer. More often, they say something like this: "We eliminated what didn't work." Success is not always about discovering the perfect idea immediately. Often it is about removing the ideas that fail, until the correct direction is the only one left. This is why people who fear mistakes often move slowly. They want to discover the perfect path before they begin walking, but perfect paths rarely appear in advance. They appear after you have removed many imperfect ones. If you change the way you see mistakes, your entire journey changes. Instead of asking, "Why did I fail?" you begin asking, "What needs to improve next time?" That small shift moves your mind from frustration to learning. And once you enter a learning mindset, you stop quitting. You continue experimenting. You continue improving. And every new attempt becomes slightly better than the last. If you ever felt like you were moving slower than others, there is a possibility that the problem was never your ability. Maybe you simply haven't experimented enough. Maybe you haven't collected enough data. Maybe you stopped too early. The moment you begin trying again, the gap can close faster than you imagine, because learning compounds, experience compounds, and small improvements accumulate over time. If you recognize yourself in this idea, leave a comment below. Small losses lead to big wins. Sometimes a simple reminder can help shift the way we see challenges, because failure, when used correctly, is not a wall. It is a navigation system. Each mistake removes a wrong direction. Each attempt moves you closer to the right one. And if you want to continue learning how successful people transform failure into one of their greatest advantages, make sure you subscribe to Mentivora Pulse, because in the next chapter, we will explore something equally powerful: why successful people do not try to become perfect individuals. Instead, they build systems that multiply their strengths. And that idea may completely change the way you approach success. One of the biggest misunderstandings many people carry for years is the belief that success requires perfection. They believe they must become stronger, more confident, more skilled, more knowledgeable. They believe they must develop every ability before they begin moving forward. So they spend years trying to improve themselves in every possible direction. More courses, more books, more preparation, more self-development. But something strange happens. Despite all that preparation, many of them still feel stuck, because the real secret behind most successful people is something very different. Successful people are rarely perfect individuals. Instead, they become masters at building systems. Most people believe the path to success looks like this: become extremely skilled, become extremely confident, become extremely capable, and then success will appear. But successful entrepreneurs often follow a different path. They do not try to become perfect. They try to build environments where strengths multiply and weaknesses become manageable. Instead of asking, how can I become good at everything? They ask a much more powerful question. Who can help me become better? That question opens a completely different door, because the moment you stop trying to do everything alone, your potential expands dramatically. Think about a business founder working in Los Angeles. At the beginning, they might handle everything themselves: marketing, customer service, product development, finance, operations. But over time, they realize something important. One person cannot master every skill. There are limits to time, limits to knowledge, limits to energy, and if success depends entirely on one individual, those limits will always slow progress. So instead of trying to become perfect, they begin building a system. They hire someone who understands marketing. They collaborate with someone skilled in technology. They bring in advisors with financial expertise. Each new piece of the system strengthens the whole structure. And suddenly, the business becomes larger than the founder alone. Most people approach weaknesses differently. They try to hide them. They feel embarrassed about what they cannot do well. They worry about being judged. So they attempt to fix every weakness by themselves. But this approach creates a trap. If you try to become good at everything, you will rarely become exceptional at anything. And if you try to carry every responsibility alone, your growth will always be limited by your own capacity. Successful people understand this limitation early. Instead of hiding their weaknesses, they study them carefully. They treat weaknesses like a map, because every weakness reveals something useful. It tells them where they need support, where they need collaboration, where they need systems. Imagine a small startup operating in Miami. The founder might be brilliant at creating products, but terrible at managing finances. Another founder might be incredible at sales, but weak in technical development. Instead of forcing themselves to master every field, successful founders connect with others. They build teams. They combine different strengths. And suddenly, by Samarayan, a group of individuals can achieve something that none of them could accomplish alone. This is the true power of systems. Systems multiply ability. Systems multiply time. Systems multiply opportunity. Think about it in the simplest terms. Every human being has the same number of hours in a day. 24. No matter how intelligent you are, no matter how hardworking you are, you cannot escape that limit. But a system does not have that limitation. A team of 10 people creates 240 working hours per day. Add technology, add automation, add processes, and the impact becomes even larger. This is why successful entrepreneurs focus less on individual effort and more on system design. They understand that leverage creates scale. Leverage is one of the most powerful ideas in the modern world. Instead of working harder alone, successful people build structures that allow one action to create many results. An online course can teach thousands of students. A digital product can be sold worldwide. A strong team can operate across multiple markets. And a well-designed system can continue producing results even when the founder is not present. This is the difference between working inside a system and building one. But for many people, building systems feels uncomfortable because it requires admitting that you cannot do everything. It requires trusting others. It requires collaboration. And sometimes, it requires letting go of control. But successful people understand something critical. Control is not the same as progress. Trying to control every detail often slows growth, whereas empowering the right people can accelerate it. Think about the companies that shape the modern world. Major technology companies in Silicon Valley, financial institutions on Wall Street, media organizations in New York. None of them were built by one individual alone. Behind every visible leader is a network of teams, systems, and processes. Thousands of people contributing different strengths. Thousands of decisions improving the system every day. The leader's role is not to do everything. The leader's role is to build the environment where everything works together. This idea also applies to personal growth. Many people delay starting something new because they believe they must become perfect first. They think they must learn every skill before they begin. But successful people understand something simpler. They do not need to know everything. They only need to begin. As they move forward, they learn which skills are required. They learn which people can help. They learn which tools improve efficiency. And gradually, a system begins to form around them. There is a major difference between the mindset of an individual performer and the mindset of a system builder. An individual performer asks, "How can I work harder?" A system builder asks, "How can this work better?" An individual performer relies on personal effort. A system builder relies on structure. An individual performer eventually hits a ceiling. A system builder continues expanding. The truth is, many people postpone action because they feel unprepared. They think they need more knowledge, more experience, more confidence. But successful people rarely begin from a position of total readiness. They begin with uncertainty. They begin with incomplete information. And as they move forward, they build the missing pieces, skill by skill, connection by connection, system by system. If you have ever felt that you were not good enough to start something, remember this simple truth. No one begins from a position of perfection. Every successful journey starts with imperfection. The difference is not who is ready. The difference is who begins anyway. If you are still listening to this chapter, leave a comment below. I build systems, not excuses. Sometimes a small reminder like this can shift the way we approach challenges, because success rarely belongs to the person who does everything alone. It belongs to the person who learns how to build structures that multiply effort. And if you want to continue exploring how successful people design their lives around leverage, learning, and growth, make sure you subscribe to Mentivora Pulse, because in the next chapter, we will explore another powerful concept: why many successful people actually prefer small failures instead of big wins. And understanding that idea may completely transform the way you approach risk, money, and opportunity. There is a principle that many successful investors, founders, and entrepreneurs understand very early in their journey. But surprisingly, very few people explain it clearly. Successful people do not try to avoid losing. They try to lose small. At first, this idea sounds strange. After all, everything we learned growing up told us to win, to succeed immediately, to make the right decision the first time. But the real world of money, business, and opportunity does not work that way. In reality, the people who succeed in the long run are not the people who win every time. They are the people who avoid catastrophic losses. Imagine two entrepreneurs launching businesses in Seattle. Both see the same opportunity. Both believe their idea might work, but they approach the situation differently. The first entrepreneur decides to invest everything. They borrow money. They spend years preparing. They put enormous pressure on the first launch. For them, this attempt must succeed because they have placed everything on a single moment. The second entrepreneur takes another path. Instead of risking everything at once, they start small. They launch a simple version. They test the idea with a small audience. They invest only a limited amount of time and money. Their goal is not immediate victory. Their goal is understanding. Now imagine the business idea fails. For the first entrepreneur, the loss is devastating. Financially, emotionally, psychologically. It may take years to recover. Some people never try again. But for the second entrepreneur, the loss is manageable. They lose a little money, they lose a little time, but they gain something far more valuable: clarity. They now understand the market better. They understand their audience better. They understand the weaknesses in their idea, and that knowledge improves their next attempt. This approach is often described as failing small, and failing small is one of the most powerful strategies in the world of innovation, because small failures are affordable, they are survivable, and most importantly, they are educational. Every small failure teaches something new. It reveals assumptions that were incorrect. It exposes weaknesses in the plan. It highlights opportunities for improvement. And when those lessons accumulate, they dramatically increase the chances of long-term success. Now compare this approach with the mindset of many people who fear failure. Because they are afraid to lose, they delay action. They prepare longer. They analyze every detail. They try to eliminate every risk. They imagine the perfect strategy. But in doing so, they accidentally create a dangerous situation. They transform one small experiment into a massive gamble. Because when they finally decide to act, they place enormous expectations on that single attempt. They need it to work. They need it to succeed immediately. And when it doesn't, the emotional impact becomes overwhelming. This is why many people abandon their goals after their first major failure. Not because they lack talent, not because the opportunity was impossible, but because the cost of that failure was too large. Successful people reverse this process. Instead of making one giant attempt, they make many smaller attempts. Instead of betting everything once, they place many controlled experiments. Each attempt teaches something. Each lesson improves the next attempt. And over time, this method quietly builds experience. Think about how scientists work in research laboratories. When scientists conduct experiments, they do not expect every experiment to succeed. In fact, most experiments fail. But each experiment provides data. Each result reveals something about reality. And gradually, those discoveries accumulate, until eventually the correct solution emerges. Life, business, and innovation often operate in the same way. Success rarely appears from a single perfect decision. More often, it emerges from many imperfect attempts. There is also a psychological advantage to failing small. When the stakes are small, fear becomes manageable. People feel safe enough to experiment. They feel comfortable enough to try again. But when the stakes are enormous, fear becomes paralyzing. And when fear dominates decision-making, progress slows dramatically. This is why successful people design their strategies around manageable risk. They do not eliminate risk completely. Instead, they control its size. Consider startup founders working in San Diego. Many successful founders launch what is called a minimum viable product, a simplified version of their idea. Something basic, something imperfect, something inexpensive to test. Why? Because this allows them to gather feedback quickly. They learn what customers like. They discover what customers dislike. They see which features matter most. And they gather this information before investing huge resources. This approach saves time, it saves money, and it dramatically increases the probability of building something valuable. In contrast, many people want their first version to be perfect. They want every feature complete, every detail polished, every scenario planned. But perfection takes time, sometimes years. And during that time, the world continues moving. Markets evolve, technologies change, competitors appear. The opportunity that once existed may disappear entirely. Successful people understand that speed of learning often matters more than speed of perfection. Learning faster allows them to adapt. Adapting faster allows them to survive. And survival is one of the most underrated advantages in life. Because as long as you remain in the game, new opportunities continue appearing. But once you leave the game, every opportunity disappears. This is why experienced investors often repeat a simple rule: protect the downside. If you can avoid massive losses, time becomes your ally. You can continue learning, continue improving, continue adjusting. And over enough time, the probability of success increases dramatically. In fact, many long-term success stories are not built from one spectacular victory. They are built from many small adjustments, many small experiments, many small improvements. Each individual step may look insignificant, but over years, those steps accumulate, and the final result can look extraordinary. If you look at the journeys of successful founders in Austin, New York, or Silicon Valley, you will often see this pattern. Their early attempts were imperfect, sometimes even embarrassing, but they were learning, testing, improving. And while others were waiting for perfect timing, they were collecting experience. So if you ever feel afraid of making mistakes, remember this idea. Mistakes are dangerous only when they are too large. Small mistakes are part of the learning process. Small losses are the price of experience. And experience is one of the most valuable assets any person can accumulate. If you see yourself in this chapter, leave a comment down below. And small failures build big success, because sometimes a single sentence like that can remind you of something powerful. Failure, when used wisely, is not a wall. It is a compass. Each mistake points you toward a better direction. Each attempt brings you closer to understanding what works. And if you want to continue learning how successful people transform risk into opportunity, make sure you subscribe to Mentivora Pulse, because in the next chapter, we will explore something equally important. Why many people remain stuck in life, not because they lack opportunity, but because they are avoiding the very experiences that could move them forward. And once you understand that idea, you may start seeing your own life from a completely different perspective. Many people believe they are not moving forward in life because they lack opportunity. They think they need more money, more connections, more resources, more luck. But if you look deeper, there is often another reason, a much quieter reason. Many people are avoiding the very experiences that could help them grow. They avoid mistakes, they avoid uncertainty, they avoid situations where they might feel uncomfortable, and without realizing it, this avoidance slowly keeps them in the same place for years. Think about a moment in your own life, a moment when you considered starting something new. Maybe it was learning a new skill. Maybe it was starting a business. Maybe it was applying for a better opportunity. Maybe it was speaking up with an idea that felt important to you. In many of those moments, the real obstacle was not time. It was not money. It was not lack of ability. The real obstacle was the feeling of being unprepared. We tell ourselves stories like, I need to learn more first. I need more experience. I should wait for the right moment. I'm not ready yet. But here is the strange truth. The feeling of readiness rarely appears before action. In most cases, readiness appears after action begins. Consider a young professional living in Chicago. They have an idea for a small online business. Nothing revolutionary, just a simple product they believe people might want. They research the idea. They study competitors. They watch tutorials. They learn everything they can. But weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. And the business never actually starts. Why? Because the person is waiting for the moment when everything feels clear. But clarity rarely comes first. Action creates clarity. Successful people understand this principle very early in their journey. They do not wait until they feel fully confident. They act while confidence is still developing. They do not wait until uncertainty disappears. They move forward while uncertainty still exists. And something interesting happens. The more they act, the more confident they become. Because confidence is not a prerequisite for action. Confidence is a result of action. There is a psychological loop that traps many people. They want confidence before they begin, but confidence only appears after they begin. So they continue waiting, and the longer they wait, the larger the gap becomes between intention and reality. Successful people break this loop. They start before everything feels comfortable. They understand something powerful. Feeling uncertain does not mean you should stop. Often, it means you are entering a growth zone. The human brain is designed for safety. Its primary goal is survival, not success, not wealth, not extraordinary achievement, just survival. So whenever you step outside your familiar environment, your brain sends warning signals. It creates anxiety. It creates doubt. It creates hesitation. But those signals do not always mean danger. Sometimes they simply mean you are doing something new. And new experiences are necessary for growth. Imagine someone beginning a new career in Boston. The first day at the new job feels overwhelming. Everything is unfamiliar. The environment is different. The expectations are unclear. It is easy to feel insecure. But after a few weeks, things begin to change. The environment becomes familiar. The tasks become easier. Confidence begins to grow. Nothing magical happened. The person simply stayed long enough for uncertainty to become experience. The same pattern appears in almost every form of growth. Think about the first time someone enters a gym. They might feel awkward. They might feel inexperienced. They might feel like everyone else knows exactly what they are doing. But if they return again and again and again, that unfamiliar place gradually becomes comfortable. And the person who once felt unsure becomes someone who moves confidently through the same environment. Growth rarely requires one giant leap. More often, it requires many small steps taken repeatedly. Successful people understand that discomfort is not an enemy. It is often a signal that you are expanding, a signal that you are developing new abilities, a signal that you are leaving the limits of your previous experience. Instead of avoiding discomfort, they learn how to work alongside it. They accept that progress will sometimes feel uncertain. They accept that growth requires temporary instability. And because they accept this reality, they continue moving forward while others hesitate. The difference between people who move forward and those who remain stuck is rarely talent. It is rarely intelligence. More often, it is simply the number of times they are willing to begin. Some people wait until everything feels perfect. Others begin even when things are incomplete. And the people who begin earlier start learning earlier, which means they improve earlier, which means they move forward earlier. Look at the people you admire. Entrepreneurs in Austin, creators in Los Angeles, investors in New York. Most of them did not begin with perfect clarity. They began with uncertainty. They began with incomplete knowledge. They began with doubts, but they began. And each step forward made the next step easier, not because the road became smoother, but because they became stronger. If you are still listening to this chapter, leave a comment below. I move forward even when I feel uncertain. Sometimes saying those words can remind you of something powerful. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is movement despite fear. The people who grow the most in life are not the ones who feel no fear. They are the ones who continue moving even while fear is present. And if you want to continue exploring the mindset shifts that help people transform hesitation into momentum, make sure you subscribe to Mentivora Pulse, because in the next chapter we will explore another powerful idea: why the most successful people often choose paths that the majority of people avoid. And understanding that idea may completely change the way you see opportunity. Imagine standing at the beginning of two different roads. The first road is wide, smooth, clear. Thousands of people are already walking there. The direction looks obvious. The destination appears predictable. If you follow that road, you will probably encounter very few surprises. The second road looks very different. It is narrower, less defined. Only a small number of people seem to be walking in that direction. The destination is not entirely visible, and from where you stand, you cannot see exactly where it leads. For most people, the natural choice is the first road, because it feels safe, it feels familiar, and most importantly, it feels socially acceptable. When everyone else is moving in the same direction, it feels comfortable to follow. But there is a truth that very few people say out loud. When too many people are already on the same path, the largest opportunities are usually gone. Think about industries that once seemed new and uncertain. Technology startups in Silicon Valley, cryptocurrency projects in their earliest years, the rise of social media platforms. In the beginning, very few people believed in them. The risks looked too high. The outcomes looked too unclear. Most people waited. They watched from a distance. They waited until the opportunity felt safer. But by the time something becomes obviously successful, the biggest advantages often belong to the people who started earlier. Highly successful people understand this dynamic very well. They do not ask the same question most people ask. Most people ask, "What is everyone doing right now?" Successful people ask something different. What is everyone ignoring? That single shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of chasing trends after they become popular, they look for signals before the trend becomes obvious. They look for gaps, spaces, unnoticed possibilities, places where the crowd has not arrived yet. Because in those quiet spaces, opportunity often still exists. This does not mean successful people always predict correctly. Sometimes their ideas fail. Sometimes they move too early. But their willingness to explore before the crowd arrives gives them something valuable. Perspective. They see the landscape before it becomes crowded. They understand the challenges earlier. They learn the environment faster. And when the rest of the world finally begins paying attention, they already have experience. Imagine an entrepreneur living in Denver. They notice a new technology that few people are discussing yet. The market is uncertain. There are no guarantees. Many people dismiss the idea. They say it is too early, too risky, too unclear. But the entrepreneur begins experimenting. They build small prototypes. They learn how the technology works. They connect with others who share similar curiosity. At first, progress may seem slow, but something important is happening. While the majority of people are waiting, this person is learning. And when the opportunity finally becomes obvious, they are already prepared. There is another reason why most people prefer following the crowd. It reduces criticism. When you do the same thing everyone else is doing, you rarely stand out. If the decision fails, you can say you simply followed the common path. But when you try something different, the risk of criticism increases. People may question your judgment. They may doubt your decision. They may even laugh at the idea. And for many people, that social pressure is enough to stop them. Successful people accept that early exploration can feel lonely. They understand that moving ahead of the crowd often means walking without validation. But they also understand something powerful. If you want results that most people never achieve, you must sometimes take paths that most people never consider, because identical actions produce identical outcomes. Different outcomes require different actions. There is also an interesting paradox in the idea of safety. Many people believe that the safest strategy in life is to remain stable, to avoid uncertainty, to maintain the same routine. But in a rapidly changing world, stability itself can become a hidden risk. Industries change. Technology evolves, economic conditions shift, and the opportunities that exist today may not exist tomorrow. If you rely only on what feels safe now, you may miss the changes that are already shaping the future. Successful people do not resist change. They search for it. They observe it. They study how the world is slowly transforming, because every transformation creates new opportunities. When a new technology appears, new businesses emerge. When industries evolve, new roles become valuable. When markets shift, new problems appear that someone can solve. And the people who notice those changes early often benefit the most. This does not mean you must abandon everything familiar to chase uncertain ideas. Radical decisions are not always necessary. Sometimes the difference begins with something much smaller. Curiosity, paying attention to what is changing around you, asking questions that others are not asking, testing ideas that others hesitate to explore. Each small step in a new direction reveals new information, and that information gradually builds understanding. Over time, this mindset creates a very different relationship with opportunity. Instead of waiting for obvious trends, successful people develop the habit of noticing subtle signals, small changes, new technologies, shifting consumer behavior, cultural movements, tiny hints that something new is beginning to form. And by the time the trend becomes visible to the entire world, they are already involved, already learning, already moving forward. If you want results that look different from the crowd, you must be willing to think differently from the crowd. This does not guarantee success, but it dramatically increases the chance of discovering opportunities that others overlook. And over many years, those discoveries can transform entire careers, entire businesses, entire lives. If you are still listening to this chapter, leave a comment below. I'm willing to explore where others hesitate. Sometimes that reminder can help you see opportunity from a new perspective, because the best opportunities in life rarely appear where everyone is already looking. They often appear in places that feel uncertain, quiet, uncrowded, waiting for someone curious enough to explore them. And if you want to continue exploring the mindset shifts that help people recognize opportunity before it becomes obvious, make sure you subscribe to Mentavora Pulse, because in the next chapter, we will explore a powerful realization: why success is rarely the result of one big moment, but instead the result of hundreds of small decisions repeated over time. And once you understand that principle, you will start seeing progress in a completely different way. There is a moment that many people experience in life, but very few people fully understand. It is the moment when you look back at your past and suddenly realize something surprising. The decisions that once felt enormous, the choices that once kept you awake at night, the risks that once felt overwhelming, often appear much smaller when viewed from the future. This happens because fear is usually strongest before action. When we imagine the future, our minds can create hundreds of negative possibilities. We imagine everything that could go wrong. We imagine embarrassment, failure, loss, disappointment. But once we actually take action, the situation changes. Instead of dealing with imagination, we deal with reality. And reality is often easier to navigate than the fears inside our minds. Successful people understand this psychological pattern very well. They know that many barriers in life exist primarily in the mind, not in the external world. They do not wait for fear to disappear. They act so that fear gradually becomes smaller. Each action creates a little more understanding. Each step forward reduces uncertainty. And slowly, what once seemed intimidating begins to feel manageable. But there is another powerful idea hidden inside this process. Success rarely comes from one dramatic moment. Most success stories are not built from a single decision. Instead, they are built from hundreds of small decisions repeated over time. Small actions, small improvements, small adjustments. Individually, each decision may seem insignificant, but when these decisions accumulate over months and years, the results can become extraordinary. Imagine two individuals starting their careers in New York City. Both begin at similar positions. Both have similar education. Both have similar opportunities. But their daily decisions slowly begin to differ. The first person chooses comfort. They perform their tasks. They follow the routine. They avoid risks. They rarely experiment with new ideas. Their career moves forward, but slowly. The second person makes slightly different choices. They read more. They ask more questions. They attempt small projects outside their job description. They learn new skills during their free time. They experiment with ideas that might fail. At first, the difference between these two individuals is almost invisible. After 1 year, their lives still look similar. After 2 years, the difference remains small. But after 10 years, the gap can become dramatic. Not because one person was dramatically more talented, but because small decisions were repeated thousands of times. This phenomenon is often called the compound effect. Just like money invested in financial markets can grow over time through compounding. Skills and experience grow through repeated effort. Each small improvement builds on the previous one. Each lesson improves the next decision, and over time, the progress accelerates. Think about professional investors working on Wall Street. They do not rely on a single perfect trade. Instead, they focus on long-term strategies, consistent discipline, careful adjustments. Over many years, those strategies compound. Small advantages become significant gains. The same principle applies far beyond finance. It applies to knowledge, to business, to personal development. Most people underestimate the power of consistency because small improvements do not look impressive in the short term. Reading 10 pages a day does not feel extraordinary. Learning a new skill for 30 minutes each evening does not seem dramatic. Improving one small habit each week does not appear life-changing. But over time, those small actions accumulate. And the person who continues them for years develops a powerful advantage. Successful entrepreneurs understand this idea deeply. They do not search for one giant breakthrough. They focus on continuous progress. One improvement today, another adjustment tomorrow, another lesson next week. Each step moves them forward slightly, and over long periods of time, Those small steps create enormous momentum. Consider someone building a startup in Nashville. The first version of their product is simple, not perfect, not revolutionary, but it works. They release it. Customers provide feedback. Some features succeed, others fail. The founder listens carefully. They improve the design. They adjust the marketing message. They refine the product again. Month after month, the product becomes stronger. Eventually, what began as a small experiment turns into something significant. But the transformation did not happen overnight. It was built through hundreds of small improvements. This is why successful people rarely focus on immediate perfection. They focus on momentum. Momentum is created through repeated action, even imperfect action. Each step forward creates new opportunities. Each lesson creates better decisions, and each decision moves them closer to their goals. Many people wait for a dramatic moment that will change their lives. They imagine a breakthrough, a sudden opportunity, a single decision that transforms everything. But real transformation rarely works that way. More often, life changes gradually, through consistent effort, through small improvements, through repeated action. If you look closely at people you admire, entrepreneurs in Austin, creators in Los Angeles, investors in New York, you will often discover something surprising. Their success was not built in one day. It was built through thousands of ordinary moments. Moments when they chose to continue learning. Moments when they chose to continue improving. Moments when they chose to continue moving forward even when progress felt slow. And eventually, those small decisions create something powerful. Momentum. Momentum makes future progress easier. Momentum builds confidence. Momentum attracts opportunity. And once momentum appears, progress accelerates. If you are still listening to this chapter, leave a comment below. Small steps create big change, because sometimes a simple reminder like that can transform how we see progress. You do not need one giant leap to change your life. You only need many small steps taken consistently. And if you want to continue exploring how small decisions can transform your future, make sure you subscribe to Mentivora Pulse, because in the next chapter, we will explore a powerful realization: why many people believe their circumstances control their future, when in reality, their reactions to those circumstances are what truly shape their lives. When you step back and observe the journeys of successful people, you begin to notice something interesting. The difference between those who move forward and those who remain stuck rarely begins with talent. It rarely begins with intelligence, and it rarely begins with opportunity. More often, the difference begins with how they respond to the same situation, the same challenge, the same mistake, the same failure. Imagine two entrepreneurs starting businesses in Phoenix, Arizona. Both launch their ideas around the same time. Both invest their energy. Both believe their idea might work. But after several months, their businesses struggle. Sales are slow, customers are uncertain, and the original plan does not perform as expected. At this moment, both individuals face the same reality, the same disappointment, the same uncertainty, but their responses begin to diverge. The first entrepreneur interprets the situation personally. They begin asking questions like, maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe this idea was a mistake. Maybe successful people are just different from me. The disappointment feels heavy. Embarrassment appears. Doubt grows stronger. And eventually, the entrepreneur decides to stop. The project ends. The lesson remains incomplete. The second entrepreneur sees the same situation differently. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? They ask, what part of this strategy needs improvement? They analyze the product. They study customer feedback. They identify weaknesses. Maybe the pricing was wrong. Maybe the marketing message was unclear. Maybe the target audience was incorrect. Instead of abandoning the project, they adjust it. They change direction. They try again. From the outside, these two individuals began in exactly the same place, But one response creates a stopping point, and the other response creates a new beginning. This difference may seem small, but when repeated over many years, it produces completely different outcomes. Successful people develop a unique relationship with failure. They do not see failure as a personal judgment. They see it as information. Raw information that can be analyzed, refined, improved. In their eyes, failure is not proof that they are incapable. It is simply a signal that the current method needs adjustment. Think about a technology founder working in San Jose, California. The first version of their software might not attract users. The second version may still struggle. The third version may begin showing signs of progress. But none of those improvements would happen if the founder interpreted early failure as the end of the journey. Progress requires interpretation. How you interpret setbacks determines what you do next. This principle appears in almost every field of life. Athletes lose games. Scientists conduct experiments that do not work. Artists create projects that never reach audiences. But the individuals who continue improving share a similar mindset. They do not define themselves by their failures. They define themselves by their willingness to learn. And because they continue learning, their abilities continue evolving. Many people believe successful individuals possess something special, a unique confidence, an extraordinary mindset. But in reality, their greatest advantage often comes from something simpler. They stay in the process longer. They remain in the game while others withdraw. They continue adjusting while others stop trying. And because they remain active in the process of learning, they accumulate more experience, more data, more understanding. Imagine two people starting at the same point. In the first year, one person tries something new and learns one lesson. The other person hesitates and waits for certainty. In the second year, the first person tries several new ideas and learns several lessons. The second person continues waiting. By the third year, the difference begins to appear. Not because one person is more talented, but because one person has gathered more experience. They understand more about the world, about people, about themselves, and that knowledge guides their future decisions. Over time, this difference compounds. One individual accumulates experience and confidence. The other accumulates hesitation and regret. And after many years, the outside world may describe one person as successful and the other as unlucky. But behind those labels lies something far more practical. A series of small decisions. A series of responses to the same types of challenges. Repeated again and again. Successful people do not possess extra hours in the day. They do not experience less fear. They do not avoid failure completely. What they possess is a different relationship with failure. They do not run away from it. They use it. Each mistake becomes a point of adjustment. Each adjustment becomes a step forward. And when those steps accumulate over years, they create progress that can appear extraordinary from the outside. If you are still listening to this chapter, leave a comment below. I learned from every setback. Because sometimes a simple reminder like that can transform the way we see challenges. Failure does not define your future. Your response to failure does. The moment you begin asking, what can I learn from this? Instead of, why did this happen to me? You shift from frustration to progress. And progress always begins with learning. If you want to continue exploring the mindset shifts that help people transform challenges into stepping stones, make sure you subscribe to Mentavora Pulse. Because in the next chapter, we will explore one of the most powerful realizations in personal growth. Why life should not be viewed as a test you must pass, but as a laboratory where every experiment teaches something valuable. And once you understand that idea, your entire perspective on success can change. After everything we have explored so far, there is one realization that can completely transform the way you see success. Many people believe that life works like a test, a single exam where every decision must be correct, a situation where mistakes cost you points, and failure means you are not good enough. This belief begins early. In school, we are rewarded for correct answers. We are punished for mistakes. We are trained to believe that success